Rain-soaked and forgotten, she knelt by the broken engine. Single mom stopped to help a man in the rain wasn't how Elena planned her life story, but somewhere between grief and survival, she'd learned that broken things could be fixed, unlike the hollow in her chest where dreams once lived. Her skilled hands moved with a certainty her life lacked, unaware that this roadside act of kindness would rewrite her family's future. Some storms bring more than just water. Elena Brooks squinted through her windshield as sheets of rain hammered against the glass, creating a rhythmic percussion that almost drowned out the sound of her old sedan's struggling wipers. The highway stretched before her, like a dark ribbon, glistening under the assault of the sudden summer storm that had ambushed the afternoon commute. She'd promised Noah she wouldn't be late tonight. Pizza and a movie, their Friday tradition since he was small enough to fall asleep halfway through, his head nestled against her shoulder. These moments had become more precious as he approached his teenage years, the invisible thread between them stretching but never breaking, even as his independence grew alongside his height, that now nearly matched her own. Through the blur of rain, her headlights caught the hazard lights of a sleek black car pulled onto the shoulder ahead, its hood raised in the universal signal of automotive distress. Elena's fingers tightened instinctively around the steering wheel, her mind calculating the minutes this delay would cost her, minutes that chipped away at her promise to Noah. For 3 heartbeats, she considered driving past, adding this stranger's misfortune to the catalog of things that weren't her responsibility in a world that had already demanded too much from her. The 4th heartbeat brought her foot to the brake pedal, an unconscious decision made by the person she'd stubbornly remained, despite everything that had happened. Someone who couldn't pass a stranded motorist during a storm, no matter how tightly wound her own schedule might be. The rain enveloped her the moment she stepped out of her car, soaking through her thin jacket and plastering her dark hair against her face in seconds. Elena could make out a figure hunched over the engine compartment, the frustration evident in the tense line of shoulders beneath an expensive suit jacket that was rapidly darkening with moisture. "Need some help?" Elena called out over the drumming of raindrops against metal and asphalt, approaching with the careful confidence of someone who understood both engines and strangers. The man turned, revealing a face caught between relief and skepticism, clearly not expecting salvation in the form of a petite woman with rain-streaked glasses and mud-splattered jeans, her work boots leaving small puddles with each step toward his luxury vehicle. Patrick Collins had been staring at his engine for 15 minutes, as if sheer willpower might resurrect it, his presentation materials safely tucked in his briefcase on the passenger seat, useless now that he was stranded 20 miles from the most important meeting of his career. His phone had shown no service bars since the storm began, some cruel cosmic joke that left him feeling as if the universe itself had conspired against his carefully plotted ascent at Harborline Motors. When he heard Elena's voice cutting through the downpour, he'd almost convinced himself she was a rain-induced hallucination, a roadside mirage born from desperation and the thundering pressure of impending professional failure that pounded in his temples with each passing minute. "Unless you're secretly hiding a tow truck somewhere, I doubt it," Patrick replied, unable to keep the edge of defeat from his voice as he gestured helplessly at the exposed engine compartment, where steam mingled with rainfall in a dispiriting cloud. Elena moved beside him without hesitation, her eyes narrowing behind rain-speckled glasses as she surveyed the mechanical anatomy laid bare before her. Patrick watched in growing fascination as her expression shifted from casual interest to focused analysis, her fingers hovering over various components with the practiced precision of someone reading a familiar language. "Actually," she said, pushing her soaked hair away from her face with a forearm that left a smudge of grime across her cheek, "I think I might be able to help after all." The rain continued its relentless descent as Elena leaned deeper into the engine compartment, her movements methodical and unhurried despite the downpour. Patrick stood beside her, holding his phone's flashlight at her direction, watching her hands move with quiet authority among belts and wires and metal, occasionally requesting tools from her own car that she retrieved without complaint. Time stretched and compressed in the strange bubble they occupied on the highway's shoulder, cars occasionally rushing past in blurs of light and displaced water, while Elena worked with the single-minded focus of someone who found peace in the logical puzzles of mechanical failure. Patrick found himself studying her face, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, the way she absently caught her lower lip between her teeth when confronting a particularly challenging connection, and wondered about the story behind this mysterious roadside engineer who treated his stranded vehicle as a problem to be solved rather than an inconvenience to be avoided. Under the relentless downpour, Elena's fingers moved with a confidence that the rest of her life had long forgotten. The familiar terrain of wires, metal, and rubber components awakened muscle memories that had lain dormant during her years of school pickups and minimum wage jobs. Each diagnosis and adjustment was like reconnecting with an old friend, the kind that doesn't judge your absence or demand explanations for the years spent apart. The engine problems revealed themselves to her trained eye: a blown fuse, a loose connection, and a failing alternator belt that threatened to strand the expensive vehicle permanently if left unattended. Simple problems with simple solutions, unlike the complicated tangle her life had become, since Michael's sudden death had transformed her from senior engineer to sole provider and emotional anchor for a grieving 8-year-old boy. Patrick watched with growing amazement as this unexpected savior worked methodically beneath his hood, occasionally murmuring technical observations more to herself than to him. He'd offered to call for professional help when the rain briefly subsided enough for his phone to find a signal, but Elena had waved him off with a small smile that suggested his luxury roadside assistance would take longer to arrive than it would take her to solve the problem herself. There was something mesmerizing about her efficiency, her lack of pretense, the way she tackled each issue without complaint, despite the water that had long since soaked them both to the skin. In the corporate battlefield where Patrick had built his career, people moved with calculated purpose, each action designed to advance personal position or showcase capability. Yet here was someone applying considerable skill for no apparent benefit, beyond the simple satisfaction of fixing what was broken. The storm around them gradually softened from violent assault to persistent drizzle, the transition marked only by the changing sound of raindrops against metal and asphalt. Elena emerged from beneath the hood with streaks of grease across her forearms and a satisfied expression that transformed her features, momentarily erasing the tired lines around her eyes that Patrick had noticed when she first approached. "Try it now," she instructed, stepping back as Patrick slid behind the wheel and turned the key with the tentative hope of a man who had resigned himself to disappointment. The engine roared to life with surprising vigor, the dashboard lights illuminating the interior with their reassuring glow, and Patrick's expression of astonished relief drew a genuine laugh from Elena, a sound so unexpected that it seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. Wiping her hands on a rag she'd produced from her back pocket, Elena explained the temporary nature of her repairs, with the practiced clarity of someone accustomed to translating technical complexities into accessible language. "The alternator belt is on its last legs. You'll need to get it properly replaced within the next 100 miles or so, but it should get you to your meeting," she concluded, already backing away toward her own vehicle, as if her mission was completed, her presence no longer required now that the problem was solved. Patrick scrambled from his car, protesting that he couldn't possibly let her leave without proper compensation for saving both his vehicle and his career prospects in a single rain-soaked intervention. Elena's refusal was immediate and unmistakable, her head shaking before he even finished his offer, water droplets flying from her dark hair with the emphatic motion. "I didn't stop for money," Elena stated with quiet dignity that silenced Patrick's insistence more effectively than any argument could have. She glanced at her watch, her expression shifting subtly as she calculated the delay this roadside rescue had added to her evening schedule. The small gesture wasn't lost on Patrick, who suddenly realized he had consumed nearly 2 hours of this stranger's life, with no understanding of what obligations his breakdown might have interrupted. "At least let me give you my card," he persisted, reaching into his wallet for the embossed rectangle that represented his hard-won position at Harbor Line Motors. "And this," he added impulsively, grabbing the paper bag from his passenger seat that contained the sandwich he'd purchased that morning, untouched in the chaos of his day. "It's not much, but you must be hungry after all this work." Elena hesitated for a moment before accepting the sandwich with the same seriousness with which she might have received a formal award. Her simple thank you, carrying the weight of someone who understood the value of both giving and receiving with grace. The business card she tucked into her pocket without examining it, already turning toward her waiting car with the measured movements of someone conserving energy for whatever challenges still awaited them. Patrick watched her departure with an inexplicable reluctance, standing in the gentle aftermath of the storm as her taillights disappeared around a bend in the highway, leaving him with a functioning vehicle, an opportunity to salvage his presentation, and a nagging sense that something significant had occurred beyond the simple repair of his car, though what exactly, he couldn't yet articulate even to himself. The boardroom fell silent as Patrick concluded his presentation, the projected sales figures glowing behind him like a prophecy fulfilled rather than the narrowly rescued opportunity it actually was. The polished wood of the conference table reflected the faces of Harbor Line's executive team, their expressions ranging from measured approval to outright enthusiasm as they processed the innovative production strategy he had outlined over the past hour. CEO Margaret Westfield's subtle nod was the only endorsement Patrick truly sought, her reputation for demanding excellence matched only by her reluctance to offer praise without substantial merit. That small gesture, combined with her directive to begin implementation immediately, confirmed what Patrick had been working toward for 3 years, his transition from promising talent to essential leadership within the company's rapidly evolving structure. As colleagues dispersed with congratulatory murmurs and handshakes that carried the unspoken weight of shifting hierarchies, Patrick found himself standing alone by the wall of windows overlooking the city, his thoughts unexpectedly drifting not to his professional triumph, but to the rain-soaked woman who had made it possible. The sandwich, such a trivial offering in exchange for salvaging his career trajectory, now seemed embarrassingly inadequate in the fluorescent clarity of hindsight. Elena had refused payment with a dignity that suggested monetary compensation would have somehow diminished the simple human exchange of her assistance. Yet Patrick couldn't shake the feeling that their interaction had left him in a debt that his conventional understanding of value couldn't properly calculate. The business card she had tucked away without a glance contained access to resources that might prove useful to someone in her position, whatever that position might be. Patrick realized with a start that he knew almost nothing about the woman who had spent nearly 2 hours repairing his vehicle with expert precision. She had mentioned a son waiting at home. Noah, she'd called him, and had checked her watch with the concerned frequency of someone accountable to another's schedule. Beyond those fragments and her evident mechanical expertise, Elena Brooks remained a cipher, her story untold despite the quiet competence that had radiated from her rain-soaked figure as she methodically restored his engine to working order while declining any recognition for her considerable skill. 3 days after the presentation that secured his promotion, Patrick found himself in the Human Resources Department, requesting access to Harbor Line's engineering applicant database from the previous 5 years. His explanation about seeking candidates for the new production team was accepted without question, his recently elevated status smoothing the administrative path that might otherwise have required multiple authorizations and justifications. Seated in a small conference room with a tablet containing thousands of resumes, Patrick began the search that logic told him was likely futile. How many Elena Brooks with mechanical engineering backgrounds could possibly have applied to Harbor Line Motors within a specific time frame? The answer, as it turned out, was exactly one. The resume that appeared on Patrick's screen made him straighten in his chair, the details assembling into a portrait, so at odds with the rain-soaked roadside engineer that he might have questioned whether he'd found the right person, if not for the accompanying photograph that confirmed her identity. Elena Brooks, MSE from Stanford, former senior development engineer at Preston Automotive Technologies, with a specialization in electric vehicle battery systems and multiple patents to her name. Her application to Harbor Line dated back 3 years, with interview notes indicating she had impressed the technical team, but ultimately declined the position when it couldn't accommodate the scheduling flexibility she required as a recently widowed single parent. Patrick stared at the screen, pieces clicking into place. Her authoritative handling of his engine problems, her technical vocabulary, the quiet confidence with which she had diagnosed issues that would have mystified most professional mechanics. That evening, instead of joining colleagues for a celebration of his promotion, Patrick drove to the address listed in Elena's application materials, navigating through neighborhoods that grew progressively more modest until he reached a small, well-maintained house with faded blue trim and carefully tended flower beds lining the concrete walkway. A basketball hoop hung above the single-car garage, and a bicycle lay on its side near a porch where weathered chairs suggested habitual occupancy during warmer months. As Patrick sat in his car, questioning the impulse that had brought him to this quiet street, and the ethics of using company resources to locate someone who had helped him without expectation of anything in return, the front door opened to reveal Elena herself, now dressed in faded jeans and a sweatshirt that bore the logo of a local middle school, stepping onto the porch with a trash bag in hand and surprise registering on her face as she recognized the vehicle parked in front of her home. Elena froze on her front porch, the plastic garbage bag dangling forgotten from her fingertips as recognition dawned. The sleek black car, with its distinctive logo on the license plate frame, belonged unmistakably to the stranded executive she'd helped during last week's downpour. The man whose business card remained untouched in the pocket of her rain jacket, tossed over the mudroom chair where it had dried stiff with residual moisture. For one irrational moment, she considered retreating into her house and pretending she hadn't seen him, a fleeting instinct born from the protective shell she'd constructed around her simplified life. The years since Michael's death had taught her to minimize complications, to maintain the delicate balance between her responsibilities to Noah and the economic necessity that kept their modest home functioning. Unexpected elements, particularly those arriving in luxury vehicles, rarely contributed positively to that carefully calibrated equation. Before she could act on this impulse, Patrick emerged from his car with a tentative wave that somehow managed to communicate both confidence and uncertainty, a corporate diplomat venturing into unfamiliar territory. "Ms. Brooks," he called, his formal address striking an odd note on her residential street, where neighbors knew each other primarily by first names or familial relationships. Noah's mom, the Henderson boy, old Mrs. Kaplan, who distributed garden vegetables regardless of whether recipients had expressed any desire for zucchini. Elena set down her trash bag with deliberate slowness, buying seconds to compose herself and assess the purpose behind this unexpected visit. Her mind cycled through possibilities. Had she inadvertently damaged something expensive while repairing his car? Was he still determined to compensate her despite her clear refusal? Or perhaps something more concerning, had her impromptu roadside assistance violated some corporate policy she wasn't aware of? "Mr. Collins," she replied, matching his formality while noting that she remembered his name despite never having properly examined his card, a small detail absorbed during their rain-soaked interaction when he'd mentioned his upcoming presentation at Harborline Motors. The name had registered because Michael had once applied there before accepting his position at the firm, where he'd worked until his death. One of those insignificant connections that nonetheless create moments of recognition in the tapestry of ordinary life. Patrick approached her walkway but stopped respectfully at its edge, maintaining a distance that acknowledged he was an uninvited presence on her property. "I hope you don't mind my stopping by," he began, his corporate polish momentarily faltering as if he'd just realized the potential impropriety of tracking down someone who had helped him anonymously and appearing at their home without invitation. The awkward silence that followed was broken by the screen door swinging open behind Elena, as Noah emerged, his lanky 13-year-old frame silhouetted against the interior light of their home. "Mom, are you talking to someone?" he asked, curiosity evident in his voice as he registered the presence of the unfamiliar man in business attire standing at the edge of their property. The protective instinct that had defined Elena's existence since becoming a single parent flared instantly, her body shifting slightly to position herself between her son and the stranger, despite the rational part of her mind recognizing that Patrick presented no threat. Noah moved beside her with the confidence of early adolescence, extending his hand toward Patrick with a directness that momentarily startled both adults. "I'm Noah," he stated simply, the gesture reflecting the polite introductions Elena had insisted he learn, despite his occasional eye-rolling response to such old-fashioned social conventions. Patrick recovered quickly, shaking Noah's hand with the same respectful attention he might offer a business associate, rather than condescending to the boy's youth as many adults unconsciously did. "Patrick Collins," he replied, his gaze shifting between mother and son, with a growing awareness of the intrusion his presence represented. "Your mother saved me from a complete disaster last week when my car broke down during the storm." Noah's expression brightened with immediate interest, turning toward Elena with newfound appreciation. "You fixed his car. You didn't tell me that," he said, a note of pride mingling with the subtle accusation that she had withheld something interesting from their daily exchanges of information. Elena felt a flush of warmth at her son's reaction, not embarrassment at Patrick's presence, or concern about Noah's borderline reproachful tone, but something deeper and long forgotten, the simple pleasure of being recognized for skills that had once defined her professional identity before motherhood and widowhood had subsumed all other roles. "It wasn't a big deal," Elena demurred, though the quick glance Patrick directed at her suggested he disagreed with this assessment. "Just a temporary fix to get him to his meeting." Noah studied the visitor with renewed interest, his adolescent curiosity piqued by this unexpected connection to his mother's rarely mentioned engineering background. "Was it the alternator?" he asked Patrick, revealing a mechanical vocabulary that reflected Elena's occasional lessons in basic car maintenance, practical knowledge she believed would serve him well regardless of his future path. Patrick's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise at the technical question from someone so young, his response directed to Noah with the seriousness the question deserved. "Alternator belt, among other things. Your mom diagnosed in minutes what would have taken roadside assistance hours to figure out." The conversation that followed unfolded with unexpected ease on Elena's front porch, the initial awkwardness of Patrick's arrival dissolving into a discussion that moved naturally between technical details of vehicle maintenance and Noah's enthusiastic questions about Harborline's latest electric models. Elena observed the exchange with a mixture of pleasure at Noah's engagement and caution about the purpose behind this unannounced visit that Patrick had yet to explain. As twilight deepened around them, and porch lights began illuminating neighboring homes, Elena finally asked the question that had hovered unspoken since Patrick's arrival. "Not that this hasn't been interesting, Mr. Collins, but I'm guessing you didn't track me down just to thank me again for roadside assistance." The directness of her query seemed to recall Patrick to his original purpose, his expression shifting from the relaxed engagement of their impromptu conversation to something more measured and intentional. "I looked you up," Patrick admitted, his candor immediately dispelling the building tension of Elena's question. "After what you did for my car, for me, I wanted to know more about the person who had the skills to diagnose and fix those problems so efficiently." A flicker of defensiveness crossed Elena's features, her shoulders straightening almost imperceptibly as her gaze sharpened with sudden wariness. Privacy had become precious in the aftermath of Michael's death, when well-meaning concern had often felt like intrusion into the raw wound of their grief. Noah, sensing the subtle shift in his mother's demeanor, moved fractionally closer to her side in an unconscious gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes about their relationship. They were a unit, a team accustomed to facing the world together. Patrick recognized the shift immediately, his hands raising slightly in a placating gesture. "I know that sounds intrusive," he continued, "and perhaps it was, but I have access to Harborline's applicant database, and when I found your resume from 3 years ago..." He paused, seemingly searching for words that wouldn't sound patronizing or presumptuous. "Elena, your credentials are extraordinary. Preston Automotive's battery development team, Stanford Engineering, multiple patents. You were exactly the kind of talent Harborline has been desperate to recruit." The interview notes said you were perfect for the senior development position but declined because of scheduling conflicts after your husband's passing. The mention of Michael hung in the air between them, a reminder of the life-altering event that had reconfigured everything about Elena's existence, from her career trajectory to her daily routines. The porch light cast shadows across Elena's face as she processed Patrick's words, her expression carefully controlled despite the unexpected excavation of her former professional identity. "That was a different lifetime," she said quietly, her tone neutral, but with an undercurrent that suggested boundaries being approached. "I made choices based on what Noah needed then, what we both needed." Her hand moved unconsciously to her son's shoulder, a gesture of both protection and acknowledgement of the partnership they had forged in the aftermath of loss. Noah looked between the adults with the keen perception of a child who had matured early through necessity, his awareness of the unspoken currents evident in his attentive silence. Patrick nodded, understanding reflected in his eyes that suggested he recognized the weight of her statement, without fully comprehending the lived reality behind it. "Of course," he affirmed, "and I'm not here to question those choices or to suggest they weren't exactly right for your situation." He hesitated, glancing at the modest home behind them with its carefully maintained appearance that spoke of pride operating within constraints. "But I am here because Harborline is implementing a new production strategy for our electric vehicle division, one that will require specialized engineering expertise in battery systems development." The professional cadence of his words shifted subtly, his tone warming as he moved from formal explanation to personal appeal. "Elena, I've been authorized to create a flexible position that could accommodate the schedule of a single parent. Hybrid remote work, school hours, core time, emergency leave provisions built into the contract from day one." The silence that followed his statement seemed to expand between them, filled with the ambient sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening routines, distant televisions, the mechanical hum of air conditioning units, a dog barking several houses away. Elena's expression remained carefully neutral, though her eyes reflected a complex interplay of emotions too tangled to easily interpret. It was Noah who broke the silence, his adolescent directness cutting through the hesitation with refreshing clarity. "Mom, you could work with engines again," he said, his voice carrying both excitement and a peculiar maturity, as if he were offering permission for something he'd long sensed she missed. "You always say cars make more sense than people, that they tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen." Elena's gaze shifted to her son, surprise momentarily displacing her guarded expression at hearing her own casual observations, repeated back to her with such perception. A complicated smile touched her lips, part amusement, part wistfulness, part the private acknowledgement between them of truths they rarely articulated aloud. "I say a lot of things, Noah," she responded, her tone gently teasing despite the serious undercurrent of the moment. The exchange seemed to remind her of Patrick's presence, her attention returning to him with renewed focus. "Mr. Collins, I appreciate the offer, but my life is structured very specifically now. I work at Wilson's Garage 3 days a week, and at the community college library the other 2. The hours align perfectly with Noah's school schedule, and both employers understand when emergencies arise." Patrick listened with respectful attention, neither interrupting nor allowing his expression to betray any judgment about the dramatic shift from senior engineer to part-time mechanic and library assistant. When Elena finished speaking, he nodded once in acknowledgement of her explanation, before offering a response that carried the weight of sincere consideration rather than rehearsed recruitment. "The position I'm describing would offer substantially more than your current arrangements, both financially and professionally," he said, carefully avoiding any implication that her current work was somehow lesser. "But more importantly, it would reconnect you with the innovative engineering that once formed the core of your career. The work your resume and patents suggest was not just employment, but genuine passion." The words landed with unexpected impact, causing Elena to draw a sharp breath that she attempted to disguise as a casual adjustment of posture. 3 years of practical arrangements and pragmatic decisions had gradually buried the memory of how it felt to lose herself in complex engineering challenges. the particular satisfaction of solving problems that required both technical precision and creative intuition. Noah watched his mother closely, his perceptiveness beyond his years revealing itself in the quiet observation. You get that same look when you're fixing something complicated at Wilson's. Mr. Peterson always says you're wasted on oil changes and brake jobs. His casual repetition of his mother's employer's assessment carried no judgment, merely the factual reporting of a teenager who absorbed more than adults sometimes realized. Elena's expression softened as she looked at her son, recognizing both his perception and the subtle encouragement underlying his comment. The years of careful parenting, of prioritizing stability and security above all else, had created between them a relationship of unusual honesty and mutual consideration. Fixing cars at Wilson's is honest work, she responded, the statement directed as much to Patrick as to Noah, a declaration of values she had embraced during their period of adjustment and rebuilding. Their satisfaction in solving immediate problems and seeing direct results. The words were true, yet even to her own ears they carried a defensive note that subtly undermined their conviction, acknowledging without stating directly that satisfaction was not the same as fulfillment or passion. The three stood in the growing darkness of the front porch, connected by a strange convergence of circumstance and choice that none could have anticipated a week earlier during a rainstorm on a highway shoulder. Patrick finally broke the contemplative silence with a gesture of respect for Elena's evident need for space to consider his unexpected proposal. I don't expect an immediate answer, he said, reaching into his jacket to produce a folder that he offered with professional courtesy. This contains the formal position description, salary information, and benefits package. Take time to review it, discuss it together, and contact me with any questions. His gaze included Noah in this statement, a small acknowledgement of the boy's stake in any decision his mother might make, a partnership rather than a dependency. As Patrick turned to leave, he added a final comment that suggested an understanding of what truly mattered in Elena's deliberations. The position description includes a section on work-life balance provisions that were developed specifically with your situation in mind. Harborline recognizes that attracting exceptional talent sometimes requires exceptional accommodation. Long after Patrick's departure, the folder rested unopened on Elena's kitchen counter, its presence commanding attention like an artifact from another world, which, in many ways, it was. The corporate logo embossed on its surface represented a life Elena had deliberately set aside when the universe had violently rearranged her priorities through Michael's sudden absence. She moved around it as she prepared a simple dinner, her actions automatic while her mind replayed fragments of the conversation on the porch, analyzing implications and possibilities that had remained dormant for so long she'd almost forgotten their existence. Noah watched her from his position at the kitchen table where homework lay neglected, his adolescent perceptiveness registering the subtle signs of inner turmoil his mother thought she was concealing. The slight furrow between her brows, the occasional pause in her methodical food preparation, the way her gaze repeatedly drifted to the unopened folder, despite her apparent determination to ignore it. "You're allowed to be interested, Mom," Noah finally stated, his voice carrying a gentleness that seemed incongruous coming from a lanky 13-year-old, more typically concerned with video games and basketball statistics than his mother's career aspirations. The simple permission in his words caused Elena's hands to still momentarily, a carrot half-sliced beneath her kitchen knife, as she processed the layers beneath his observation. They had developed their own language of care over the 3 years since Michael's death, a shared vocabulary of checking in, of monitoring each other's well-being through subtle cues and occasional direct statements that acknowledged what remained unspoken. Noah's comment now was both absolution and encouragement, recognizing her hesitation while offering release from it. Elena resumed her methodical vegetable preparation, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board punctuating her response. "It's not that simple, Noah. Our life works now. It's stable, predictable. We've built something that functions." The practical assessment was accurate, yet somehow incomplete, failing to capture the deeper complexities of their shared journey, from the shattered aftermath of loss to the functional equilibrium they currently maintained. Noah closed his textbook with deliberate care, his expression thoughtful beyond his years as he considered his mother's words. "Functioning isn't the same as thriving, though," he replied, echoing almost exactly the distinction their family counselor had emphasized during the difficult months following Michael's funeral, when basic functioning had itself seemed an unreachable goal. The observation hung between them as Elena arranged their simple meal onto plates, her movements efficient through years of practice at managing their household with minimal waste and maximum utility. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes, the routine of their evening meal providing comfortable structure around the unusual disruption Patrick's visit had introduced into their carefully ordered lives. When Noah spoke again, his words carried the weight of something long considered rather than impulsively offered. "I remember how you used to talk about your work. Before Dad died, you would come home excited about problems you were solving, designs you were creating. Sometimes you'd sketch ideas on napkins at dinner, and Dad would tease you about bringing the office home. But he always looked proud when he said it." Elena's fork paused midway to her mouth, her breath catching at this unexpected recollection from a child who had been only 10 when those dinner table moments occurred. Too young, she had assumed, to have registered or retained the subtle dynamics of his parents' shared appreciation for her professional passion. The memory Noah described belonged to a different version of herself, one whose identity had been as much defined by intellectual engagement with complex engineering challenges as by her roles as wife and mother. That version had been carefully packed away, stored in the same mental compartment as Michael's clothing and personal items, necessary sacrifices to the immediate demands of single parenthood and economic survival that had consumed every ounce of her energy and attention in the aftermath of his death. "I didn't think you remembered those conversations," Elena admitted, her voice softening with the acknowledgement. "You were so young." Noah shrugged with the casual certainty of adolescence, apparently unaware of the profound impact his recollection had on his mother's carefully maintained equilibrium. "I remember lots of things, like how you used to get this specific look when you solved something difficult, kind of intense but happy at the same time. You get that same look sometimes when you fix complicated stuff at Wilson's, but not as often, and never when you're at the library." His observation was delivered without judgment, a simple statement of pattern recognition that nonetheless cut directly to the heart of what Elena had sacrificed in reconstructing their lives after Michael's death. The kitchen fell quiet again, the only sounds the occasional clink of utensils against plates and the distant hum of the refrigerator, the soundtrack of ordinary life continuing, despite the extraordinary conversation unfolding within it. Elena studied her son's face across the table, seeing in his features echoes of both Michael and herself, but increasingly recognizing the unique person emerging as Noah navigated the complicated path from child to young adult. His resilience sometimes startled her, the way he had absorbed the devastating loss of his father and moved forward not with denial but with a kind of pragmatic acceptance that incorporated grief into his developing identity rather than being defined by it. This resilience now extended to his apparent readiness for his mother to reclaim parts of herself that had been set aside in service to their survival. "It's not just about me, Noah," Elena said finally, her tone gentle but serious as she addressed the unspoken implications of his observations. "Any major change affects both of us. A new job would mean new schedules, different responsibilities, less predictability. The work at Wilson's and the library isn't always exciting, but it gives us stability." Noah considered this with the thoughtful expression that sometimes made Elena forget he was still technically a child, his capacity for complex thinking and emotional nuance occasionally catching her off guard, despite her intimate knowledge of his development. "But what if stability isn't enough?" he asked, the question hanging between them with philosophical weight beyond his years. "What if we're so focused on not rocking the boat that we forget how to sail anywhere new?" The metaphor struck Elena with unexpected force, recognition flooding through her at hearing her own unacknowledged restlessness articulated through her son's perceptive observation. The carefully constructed stability they had achieved after years of grief and adjustment had indeed become something of a stagnant harbor, safe but ultimately confining, protecting them from storms while simultaneously preventing exploration of unknown waters that might lead to new discoveries. Noah continued, his expression earnest as he pursued his line of thought. Besides, Mr. Collins said they designed the job specifically for someone in your situation. Doesn't that mean they already thought about the stability part? It sounds like they want to make it work for both of us. Elena reached across the table to rest her hand briefly on her son's, a gesture of appreciation for both his insight and his care. When did you get so wise? She asked, the question only half teasing as she recognized the genuine emotional intelligence underlying his perspective. Noah grinned. The serious young philosopher momentarily replaced by the more familiar 13-year-old, with a flash of mischief in his expression. Probably from all those lectures you give me about considering consequences and making thoughtful choices, he replied, his tone light but with an undercurrent of sincerity that acknowledged the values Elena had worked to instill, through both instruction and example. Their dinner completed, Elena rose to clear the plates, her movements automatic while her mind continued processing the unexpected possibilities that Patrick's visit had introduced into their carefully ordered existence. The folder remained untouched on the counter, its presence a persistent reminder of doors thought permanently closed that might still contain the possibility of opening. Noah carried his glass to the sink, pausing beside his mother with uncharacteristic hesitation before speaking again. I think Dad would want you to at least look at the offer, he said quietly. The mention of Michael delivered with the same matter-of-fact acceptance that characterized Noah's gradual integration of loss into his understanding of their family narrative. He always said you were the smartest engineer he knew, that you could build anything if you decided it mattered enough. The digital clock on Elena's nightstand displayed 2:17 a.m. in harsh red numerals that seemed to pulse accusingly in the darkness of her bedroom. Sleep had proven elusive despite physical exhaustion, her mind cycling relentlessly through cascading scenarios triggered by the folder she had finally opened after Noah went to bed. The details contained within its crisp pages represented far more than employment terms. They outlined a potential reclamation of parts of herself that had been carefully stored away when survival and stability had required her undivided focus. The salary alone would transform their financial reality, replacing constant, careful calculation with a cushion that would allow for Noah's eventual college expenses and perhaps even modest luxuries currently beyond consideration. The flexible scheduling provisions Patrick had emphasized were meticulously detailed, clearly crafted with specific attention to the challenges of single parenthood rather than generic work-life balance platitudes. Elena shifted beneath her covers, her thoughts drifting to the technical aspects of the position description that had initially captured her attention despite her determined skepticism. Harborline's new electric vehicle initiative aligned precisely with the specialized battery development work that had defined her career at Preston Automotive. The intellectual challenges that had once consumed her professional energy and creativity before Michael's death had abruptly reorganized her priorities. The position would place her at the forefront of emerging technology, with resources and collaboration opportunities that Wilson's Garage could never provide. Regardless of how supportive Mr. Peterson had been in accommodating her scheduling needs and recognizing her technical abilities beyond routine maintenance tasks. The ceiling above her bed remained stubbornly invisible in the darkness. Yet Elena stared upward as if it might somehow display the correct path forward through this unexpected fork in her carefully plotted journey. 3 years of single parenthood had transformed her approach to decision-making, every choice evaluated primarily through the lens of its impact on Noah's stability and well-being, with her own preferences or aspirations relegated to secondary consideration at best. Yet Noah's surprising encouragement suggested a readiness for change that challenged her assumptions about what their family unit needed at this stage of their shared journey. His casual observation about functioning versus thriving had lodged in her consciousness, a distinction she had deliberately avoided contemplating as they rebuilt their lives from the shattered foundation of unexpected loss. The memory of Noah's words about Michael surfaced again in the quiet darkness. He always said you were the smartest engineer he knew, the recollection bringing both pain and a bittersweet warmth that spread through her chest. Michael had been her most consistent champion, his belief in her capabilities often exceeding her own, particularly during the early years of parenthood when she had struggled to balance professional ambition with maternal responsibilities. Their partnership had made such balance possible, each supporting the other's growth while sharing the practical demands of family life. His absence had collapsed that carefully constructed framework, forcing Elena to rebuild a different structure entirely, one that prioritized security and predictability above all other considerations. Moonlight filtered through the partially opened blinds, casting striped shadows across her bedroom that shifted subtly as clouds passed overhead. Elena's thoughts turned to practical concerns that demanded attention beyond the emotional complexities of potential change. A new position would require appropriate professional clothing, her current wardrobe consisting primarily of functional basics suitable for mechanical work, or the casual environment of the community college library. Their single car, while reliable enough for current needs, might prove inadequate for the increased commuting demands of corporate employment. Childcare contingencies would need development for those inevitable occasions when Noah's school schedule and her work requirements failed to align perfectly, despite Harborline's promised flexibility. Each practical consideration spawned additional questions and potential complications that Elena's mind methodically categorized and analyzed, her engineering training unconsciously applying itself to personal logistics as it once had to technical challenges. The process was familiar and oddly comforting. Problem identification, constraint analysis, solution development, contingency planning, the systematic approach that had guided both her professional work and her navigation of life after Michael. Yet beneath the practical assessment ran a deeper current of questioning that resisted such orderly examination. Was she truly ready to reclaim the professional identity she had set aside? Would reconnecting with that aspect of herself honor or betray the sacrifices made to create their current stability? Would success in a demanding corporate environment require compromises in her parenting that Noah might resent despite his current encouragement? The questions multiplied without resolution as the clock numbers advanced toward morning, sleep remaining elusive despite Elena's awareness that functioning on minimal rest had become increasingly difficult as she moved through her 30s, another small acknowledgement of time's passage that she typically avoided confronting directly. Finally surrendering to wakefulness, she slipped quietly from her bed and padded down the hallway, pausing briefly at Noah's partially open door to listen to the rhythmic breathing that confirmed his untroubled sleep. The living room welcomed her with familiar shadows, the modest furnishings they had carefully selected together after selling the larger house that had belonged to their intact family, each piece chosen for practicality and affordability rather than aesthetic preference. Elena moved to the kitchen where the folder lay on the counter, illuminated by the dim light above the stove that remained on through the night. A habit developed during those first difficult months when Noah had frequently wandered the house seeking reassurance against nightmares. Her fingers traced the embossed logo without opening the documents again, their contents already committed to memory through repeated reading before her attempt at sleep. The position represented not merely employment, but a kind of resurrection, the recovery of professional passion and purpose that had once formed a core element of her identity before circumstances had demanded its sacrifice to more immediate necessities. The kitchen window offered a view of their small backyard. The wooden fence Michael had never completed now weathered with age, but still performing its intended function of boundary and protection. Elena had finished its construction herself during that first summer of widowhood, learning through YouTube videos and neighborly advice the techniques Michael had planned to use, one of many practical skills acquired through necessity rather than choice, as she adapted to life as her family's sole provider and caretaker. The completed fence stood as a physical testament to her capacity for learning and adaptation when circumstances demanded, a reminder that necessity had often revealed capabilities she hadn't recognized in herself until challenge required their emergence. "Mom?" Noah's voice startled Elena from her reflections, his lanky silhouette appearing in the kitchen doorway, with the slightly disheveled appearance of recent sleep. "What are you doing up?" The concern in his voice reflected their reversed roles during those early months after Michael's death, when Elena's insomnia had frequently drawn Noah from his bed to check on her emotional state. A protective instinct that had emerged prematurely in a child suddenly aware of his remaining parent's vulnerability. Elena smiled reassuringly, gestured toward the kettle in silent offer of tea, which Noah declined with a small shake of his head as he moved to join her by the counter, his height now nearly matching hers, though his features still retained the softness of early adolescence, despite their serious expression. "Just thinking," Elena replied, the simple statement encompassing the complex deliberations that had occupied her sleepless hours. Noah nodded as if this explained everything, his gaze dropping to the folder between them with understanding beyond his years. "About the job," he stated rather than questioned, the observation carrying no judgment, but rather the calm acceptance that had characterized his approach to their shared navigation of life's unexpected complications. Elena nodded, studying her son's face in the dim kitchen light, searching for signs of the anxiety or insecurity a potential major change might trigger in a child who had already experienced profound disruption through his father's death. Instead, she found only patient attentiveness and a quiet steadiness that simultaneously filled her with pride and a bittersweet awareness of how quickly childhood was receding in the face of premature responsibility. Morning arrives as a quiet counterpoint to the previous night's heavy thinking, the kitchen's brightness mirroring Elena's shift from mere survival to cautious possibility. She and Noah move through breakfast like collaborators rather than parent and child, their dialogue ranging from calendars to the deeper question of who you are when life changes shape. Noah's calm wisdom, choices between different kinds of good, lands with weight echoing Michael's steadiness without freezing him in the past. The resemblance Elena sees in her son feels less like grief's sting and more like an active lineage guiding them forward. When she tells Noah she intends to accept Patrick Collins's offer, the words feel both radical and obvious, a turn from horizontal maintenance to intentional motion. Noah's simple, genuine approval becomes a hinge, permission, encouragement, and a mirror that shows her courage already forming. Practicalities follow because that is how sustainable change is built, and Elena tends to them with the same care she applies to design tolerances. She thinks of Mr. Peterson at the garage and Mrs. Hernandez at the library, the trust owed to people who steadied her when stability mattered most. Noah meets this logistics cascade with teenage brevity and earned resilience. "We've handled harder stuff," a truth that compresses years of loss and repair into one clean line. Their partnership, forged in grief, functions now as a method. Set a goal, map the dependencies, anticipate failure modes, iterate with empathy. The call with Patrick confirms what the porch conversation promised. Flexibility as design principle, not exception. Value measured in outcomes, not hours logged. Negotiation sharpens Elena's confidence, and by the time the transition weeks unfold, she is already practicing the balance she intends to keep. Farewells are modest but meaningful, stitching her story to a wider community that witnessed the long middle between catastrophe and renewal. The garage sends her off with gruff pride. The library offers a journal that recognizes not just work done, but presence kept. Noah's support stays steady yet human, flickering between excitement for his mother and the normal worry about shared projects and shifting routines. Elena answers with specificity, timelines, stages, predictable gates, because predictability is how you make room for hope without breaking the structure. On the first day at Harborline, Noah snaps a photo and names it a comeback tour, humor softening the enormity of an identity reclaimed. What the image captures, quiet anticipation overlaid with composure, becomes proof that returning is not regression but recombination. Harborline is fluorescent and precise, a landscape of folders, credentials, and prototypes, that wakes the parts of Elena's mind that had slept out of necessity. Introductions are balanced. No pedestal, no diminishment, just context and expectations anchored in the work. Early hours go to systems and access. The afternoon opens into schematics where she starts translating questions into pathways. 5 o'clock arrives like a small ethical test, pitting Flo against the promise she made to Noah and to herself about how this would go. She shuts down on time because endurance depends on cadence, not adrenaline, and because trust comes from keeping the terms you set. The drive home becomes a decompression chamber, where engagement doesn't evaporate, it settles into a shareable form. Days stack into weeks, and the work proves worthy, complex enough to stretch her, adjacent enough to reward her history. Her third-week proposals move dials on efficiency, and colleagues who once watched from a distance begin to seek her input, the signal of respect that matters more than fanfare. At home, micro-adjustments become their new operating system. Co-cooked dinners, parallel work sessions, laughter pacing the edges of fatigue. Noah names what Elena hadn't said aloud. You seem different already, tracing the outline of a self coming fully back online. Income rises quietly into a college fund and a cushion, choices made to prioritize resilience over display. The philosophy holds, reintegration is not a sprint to prove worth. It is a sustainable loop where care and ambition coexist. When the first true flexibility test hits, Noah's sudden illness, Elena feels the tug of momentum and then obeys the architecture she negotiated. Protocols engage, remote access bridges the gap, and Patrick responds like a leader who meant what he promised. The team advances simulations while she monitors from home, alternating thermometers and telemetry with the calm of someone who understands throughput and human limits. The day becomes evidence, not theory, that a system can honor both competence and care. Noah sees it too, naming the shift with quiet satisfaction. It's working, isn't it? Elena answers with a measured yes that carries the density of a hard-won truth. Balance, it turns out, is not a fragile truce, but a practiced discipline. Months later, Rain draws a circle around the beginning, and this near completion, gentler now, as Elena heads to present the work that bears her signature in both method and result. The boardroom is the same room that once depended on her roadside kindness, and today she fills its center with a narrative of numbers, materials, and manufacturability. Her advantage is integration, theory braided with years of wrench-in-hand pragmatism, a dual fluency that converts elegant ideas into buildable parts. Questions shift from if to how, a small linguistic migration that signals institutional commitment. Margaret Westfield asks what unlocked the door they had pushed for years, and Elena answers with cross-disciplinary truth anchored in lived experience. The approval is crisp and operational. Accelerate, report, proceed. Outside, Patrick names the broader thesis, flexibility as investment, while giving Elena the credit that belongs to her. Back home, celebration refuses grandiosity, holding to pizza and a movie because traditions are what give extraordinary days a place to land. Noah's curiosity threads through technical specifics towards something larger. What comes next, and how do we carry it? Elena answers with both timelines and temperance, prototypes, scaling, and the vow to keep adjusting without losing the shape of what matters. Noah sees the causal chain, the rainy shoulder, the offered help, the unforeseen cascade, and calls it what it is, life's non-linearity working for once in their favor. The insight settles like a steadying hand on the wheel. The evening closes with Rain at the window and a simple sentence that costs Noah nothing and gives Elena everything. I'm proud of you, Mom. It gathers the years of detour, the quiet refusals to give up, the refusal to let grief be the only architect. Elena squeezes his hand, a tactile acknowledgement that words cannot carry alone, and allows herself to feel the relief of alignment. Tomorrow will not be lighter, just clearer. Basketball games, production meetings, laundry, and the next set of trade-offs to navigate with care. What began as repair has become design. What once felt like loss only has also become resource. Sometimes you stop to help in the rain, And sometimes the road, improbably, helps you back.